Hello, thank you for joining me. With the ceasefire in place between India and Pakistan, the focus will shift to diplomacy and diplomatic efforts. To get a sense of the complexities that have emerged, assess the challenges that lie ahead, and understand the situation that we are in after Operation Sindoor, I'm talking to Professor Amitabh Mattoo. He's an expert on international relations, on the subject of Kashmir, and on the torturous relations between India and Pakistan that have evolved over the past 70 years. Professor Amitabh Mattoo is the Dean and Professor of the School of International Studies at JNU. He's also a writer and scholar. Professor Mattu, thank you for making time to talk to me at such a tenuous, such a anxiety-ridden time.
Thank you, Anuradha, for inviting me. It's always a great pleasure and an honor to be part of your program.
Thank you. Professor Mattu, let's start with this focus shifting back to diplomatic efforts. And I'm going to start with now and then go back in time over the last 2, 3 weeks. And of course, leading up to April 22nd, which was the day of the Pahalgam attack. We are talking in a week where India is sending out seven multi-party all-party delegations to different parts of the world to tell people what has transpired, India's point of view, and the story so far. What do you make of this diplomatic outreach? How does one need to understand why we need to do this?
I think, first of all, you have to realize that no conflict, no war can be fought just bilaterally or resolved bilaterally in the larger sense of the word. It doesn't mean that you have mediation or interventions, but there is the world of public opinion which matters, especially public opinion amongst the great powers, but also members of the Security Council, non permanent members. And I think it was important for India to send a clear message about how we feel about Pakistan's support for terrorism and what's been happening over the last 3 decades, but particularly the incident that happened, the horrifying, traumatic incident that happened in Pahalgam, and say so in a single voice. And that's why I think it has to be appreciated, and it's laudable that you have across the parties members going and speaking, presumably in one voice. They'll have their own nuances. They will. That's the beauty of India, that we don't speak in a monotonous voice. We will have our robust views, but all within the rubric of what we feel about about terrorism being carried out by our neighbor. Uh, and I think, given the fact that you've had this knee-jerk reaction from some quarters in the West, particularly, suggesting that India may not have had the evidence or that the story is more complicated, and particularly President Trump's own seemingly off the cuff remarks that he could resolve the Kashmir conflict on his own, and that India Pakistan almost went to war, and that they've been in conflict for 1,000 years. I think it was important to send people for awareness, building up awareness about this conflict, and also for dissemination of a clear message.
This global narrative that India is trying to communicate at this point of time via these parliamentary delegations, does it suggest that India's communication, that in the narrative from India's point of view has not been understood or has been actually doubted? Do you think we have a challenge on our hands on this front?
Of course, there is a challenge. It's a
Mm,
huge challenge.
mm,
If you look at the stories that come out of the New York Times or the Washington Post, it isn't as if they are uh, completely uh, understanding our message. And that's just two major newspapers from the United States. Even the others, if you look at the Telegraph, Le Monde, the Spiegel, they, these are papers which have actually communicated a message which is less stark from India's point of view. India's point of view is clear that Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir was enjoying unprecedented calm. We were on the cusp of a huge tourist season, and then you have the most heinous attack on tourists there has ever been in Jammu and Kashmir. 25 Indians and one Nepali tourist gets killed in a brutal fashion. They're separated as Hindus from other communities and targeted. This message has not resonated, particularly after India, legitimately, in my opinion, decided to strike at terrorist targets. The world seems to be now moved beyond the terrorist attacks to Pahalgam to focusing on the possibility of a nuclear conflict, the the idea that somehow Kashmir still needs a resolution. That's the trouble with public opinion. It has a short memory. So you need to now actually go and instill and distill also more clearly the essence of what happened. And that the problem in South Asia is really, and I say this as someone who's been engaged and deeply invested in efforts to build peace in South Asia, that the problem is the state of Pakistan.
But Professor Mattu, in the past two, two terms that we've seen Prime Minister Modi lead this country, we have seen the investment in meeting foreign leaders, in being parts of large multilateral organizations, the political narrative of also of being Vishwaguru, the world is one. There has been very sustained foreign policy efforts by Prime Minister Modi in the last decade and more. Why has that then, at this point of time, why does that seem to have not borne fruit? Or some even would suggest that it has not been successful or failed, in fact.
See, I think you need to understand the nature, the structure of the international system. Um, this is a self-help system, essentially, and in a self-help system, the superpower often calls the shots. Everyone has to take care of their own interests, but in as much as there is as much as there is a clear message which can be sent, that is sent by, in this case, the United States of America. India invested hugely in that relationship, and
Yes.
rightly so. You have a very effective foreign minister who understands America, the way America functions through the lobbies, through Congress, through the multiple agencies, through what now is in popular parlance is described sometimes too lavishly as a deep state, as if it was some kind of an archaeological wonder. But so there has been this huge investment over the last two terms. Prime Minister Modi has reached out to presidents, whether it was Biden or or indeed to
President Trump in his
Trump as
previous,
well in his
yeah,
previous avatar, as well as
yeah,
Obama.
yes.
So, but Trump 2.0 is a conundrum. Is a leader and a president who it's not easy to grapple with. Can't always understand what works for them, except for the general idea that all life and all international relations is about making deals. It's not easy to then rationally construct an agenda which you know with certainty will meet Trump's support or endorsement.
Mm,
So India did all the right things. Jaishankar was right there. If there was a seat called 1A, there is in an aircraft, he was sitting right on 1A
mm,
during the inauguration. He met with Rubio, who was the Secretary of State. He met with Waltz. The NSA met with Waltz, who was the National Security Advisor. J.D. Vance was seen as a big supporter of India. All the right things. In fact, within the American administration, within the Trump administration, you have probably the strongest suit that India holds in terms of people who are pro India. J.D. Vance, apart from the fact that he's spoken highly about India, apart from the fact that he has deep skepticism about China, is married to an Indian who's invested in India, whose finest relationships are in India, and was holidaying in Jaipur while this
the
incident happened.
Belgaum attack happened.
Yeah, I visited Rambagh Palace, and they said as a family they just loved the place in Jaipur while they spent 3 nights in Jaipur. So you had everything going for you, but Trump's mind is not easily comprehensible.
The statements he's made from announcing the ceasefire, you know them better than anybody else. He announced the ceasefire before there was any official word from in the Indian government. He has then gone on to offer mediation to solve the Kashmir problem, which he says is 1,000 years old. He has then also said that it was, the stick of trade, and using trade to get Pakistan and India to behave, or solve this problem, or to get to the ceasefire. All these statements suggest that President Trump is, like you said, some is a conundrum. He's not. We are not able to understand and make sense of this. So, in that context, what is the how does one manage diplomatic policy?
Yeah. See, the in a parsimonious sense, in a simple sense, Trump plays at both levels. He has a telescopic view of the world, black, white. So India, Pakistan, 1,000 years conflict. That's the larger picture which he gets. Then he's a micromanager in terms of decision making. So it's a dangerous combination of someone who has a very simple binary view of the world, but then wants to have control over all decisions regarding the picture that he has seen. With the result that all nuance is lost.
Hmm.
And anyone can, the last person speaking to him or the last person to get him a deal may be the person who will carry the day. In this case, for instance, there are reports that Pakistan or Pakistan's lobbyists or Pakistan supporters invested in crypto. The Trump family is going to be a huge beneficiary of that. Now, I'm not saying that all that was required was for Pakistan to invest in crypto for Trump to hyphenate India and Pakistan, to imagine that he could resolve the Kashmir conflict if there was one, or to believe that this is some kind of a biblical conflict. But it is often small things that have big impact on Trump's own persona or his general belief that everything that matters in the world is dollars, 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 and a deal, and how to make more dollars
Yeah.
can have a disproportionate effect. So even though you have Tulsi Gabbard, head of DNI, you have Kash Patel, director of the FBI, you have JD Vance, you have Michael Rubio, all pitching for India, all it requires is for Trump to say, no, this is how I see it. And anyone who decides to confront Trump with a different reality then probably could end up losing his job. And no one wants to lose a job. After all, you just invested in a new, you become part of a new Trump administration.
Professor Mattu, before he was elected, President Trump did a long session on Twitter or X with Elon Musk. At the end of it, Elon Musk tells him, "Oh, these millions," and he gives a figure. So many millions of people watched, heard us in this interaction, and Trump says, "I will." I think that sort of is a fabulous anecdote of his transactional nature. Trump replies saying, "Oh, I think you should be paying me for this."
Yeah.
So this transactional nature, this president who seems to play by no rules, to be seems like a loose cannon, wild card. You can use all kind of phrases to suggest someone who doesn't play by the existing rules framework. In this context, what is the challenge for India, given that it has invested so much in the relationship with America, led directly by Prime Minister Modi?
It is to get someone who really is close enough to President Trump to be
Hmm.
able to influence his mind,
Who could
and
that be?
take the help of, or if you ask me for out of the box solutions, ask the Ambanis and the Adanis to reach out to Trump. They may have already done so, but do so with a punch and weight which might seem disproportionate for two Indian multinational corporations, but uh, is really commensurate with the influence that certainly Mukesh Ambani could wield. This is a time for not, with due respect to all the parliamentarians, and I'm sure they'll do a great job. And with due respect to all the political leaders and the others who will be joining them, and the retired ambassadors commissioned to perform the role that they probably have outlived some years ago. But this is a time for real investors, big business, and lobbyists. Uh, that is what will matter in Trump's America. You, that is a reality which I am sure Dr. Jaishankar and the Prime Minister understand, that you have to invest heavily. Remember, this is not unprecedented. When you had a problem with Iran, you used the Hindu Jaz to help you overcome some of those problems. So often you use big business or people who are invested in the India relationship from the American side. After all, you have a large number of uh, Indians who have made it, as it were, in America. The Googles, the Satya Nadellas, all the people who could bat for India. I think that is what is important. Parliamentary delegations, as I said, is fantastic. I think they will spread the message of of India standing united, democratically across the board, speaking in one voice. But for to get tangible effects for the next year and a half, when Trump is going to be unfettered by either Congress or by any other rules. He, as you said, he doesn't play by rules,
Mm.
and he gets away with it.
So, and
If you're
therefore,
going
you're
to
saying
remind him of rules or precedents or norms, that's
doesn't
not
matter.
the way to go about
Yeah. Yeah. So then, Professor Matu, to reiterate what you're saying, India needs at this point an out of the box approach. It needs something new, something that does not conform to the normal standards and practices in the way international relations are conducted.
Exactly, absolutely. And I think these are moments where you have to have an all of government approach rather than keep the uh, foreign relations in the siloed in the MEA or the trade relations siloed in the Ministry of Commerce, or really intelligence sharing and the capacity to do things uh, buried within the intelligence agencies or the National Security Council Secretariat. I think we need to all come together as I said, from India's smart power to its soft power to its hard power, all has to come into operation. India's direct people who are going to be directly beneficiaries of this. For instance, Tim Cook had to face President Trump saying, "Don't manufacture iPhones in India; they have huge tariffs. Come and manufacture them in America." Now, Tim Cooks is going to take that seriously because he's dealing with the president of the United States and a president who could suddenly make it extremely difficult for Apple to do business abroad. And that's the reality. That is the reality of American power, diminished as it is in the charge of someone who may not be exactly like past presidents ever in the history of the United States. But the reality is that America does, given the structure of international relations, given the structure of American power, wield huge influence.
So, Professor Mattu, we've had no official statement from the Prime Minister, from the Minister of External Affairs in the context of what the American president has been saying, and he's been saying a lot. The only statement has come from, Mr. Randhir Jaiswal, the spokesperson for the Ministry of External Affairs, who says between 7th and 10th May 2025, there were conversations between Indian and US leaders on the evolving military situation. The issue of trade did not come up in any of these discussions. Should India's political leadership continue to maintain this silence on President Trump's statements? And, because the Indian public is beginning to wonder, right? Public opinion seems to be questioning what we've achieved in terms of this relationship. What is India standing if America can say all of these things and we are not able to counter it in any direct fashion?
Prime Minister Modi is a master of his message in terms of being
Hmm.
able to hold his domestic audience together
So,
while
how do
sending
you
the
read
right
this
international
silence?
message. But in this case, I think it's prudent, it's pragmatic, it's
Hmm.
practical to not square the pitch with Trump. Trump is Trump. He is sui generis. He's unique, and he is holding the position of being the most powerful man, woman, child in the planet Earth at the moment, and he knows it. So it isn't that he's not aware of his own power. So don't alienate him beyond a point. Mr. Jaiswal can, of course, say the things that he should say that, and you can play the domestic audience, given that Prime Minister Modi still has a huge support base. Even now, he is overshadows every other leader in terms of his domestic support or the loyalty that people of India have towards him. So I think that needs to be taken for granted for at least a while, that you learn how to handle Trump.
How important is it to get President Trump to look at this India Pakistan relationship and the current conflict through the lens that India needs to look at it?
Nothing
How
more important.
vital is that?
Nothing more important for Indian foreign policy right now. I mean, people will tell you this too will pass, and there are other countries and other relationships which are as important. And of course, Russia has been a traditional ally, and EU stands as a fortress today, and Japan matters, but nothing matters as much as the United States of America, and nothing matters much more than actually having Trump on your side at the moment.
Let's shift to a diplomatic move that was announced before Operation Sindoor. You have, I think, you conducted a session on it. I was speaking to former High Commissioner to Pakistan, TCA Raghavan, who talked about the Indus Waters Treaty and how the fact that it has been held in abeyance or kept in abeyance, and that announcement is actually very critical and has a huge impact, perhaps an impact that India and the public opinion, and we have not, we are not experts, we have not really understood. Do you want to help us understand really what holding this treaty in abeyance means? Also, you have written recently in the context of Kashmir, which I will deal with later in this conversation, but you have said perhaps it's time to relook at it in a more permanent manner, given Kashmir's interests. I want you to just help us understand why this is so significant.
See, the Indus Water Treaty was negotiated over 9 years, and finally signed by Field Marshal Ayub Khan and Prime Minister Nehru in 1960 under the auspices of the World Bank. It essentially partitioned the rivers of the Indus Water Basin. The three eastern rivers came to India, which is the Bias, Satluj, and Ravi, and the Jhelum, Chenab, and Indus, except for some run of the river projects that you could build, or some rights for consumption and agriculture use. You essentially, Pakistan got the rights, the bulk of the rights of those rivers. That treaty was negotiated in a manner in which India demonstrated huge generosity. 80% of the rights of the water were given to Pakistan, even though the fact is that any proportionate deal would have given India significantly more than 20%. Secondly, it was a product of Nehruvian internationalism. He believed that waters should not be weaponized, water should be kept away from the relationship, and in the hope that India and Pakistan will grow up as friendly neighbors uh, after the bloody years of partition, bloody years, in fact, I say, of partition, there would be a certain maturity. And so he demonstrated that through being even though the upper riparian state, giving away these rights. Simultaneously, because the canal system in Western Punjab that became Pakistan could be impacted, India gave 60 million pounds, sterling pounds, in compensation to help Pakistan build those canals or build other forms of drainage in the Punjab and elsewhere. So it was a generous treaty. And true, it's never ever been impacted upon by conflicts or wars. And the counterfactual question often, which I ask, is would the case have been the same if Pakistan had been the upper riparian state? That's not, that's, for me, I think it's at least a question to be posed. Second question is, when you gave away the waters of the Indus, Chenab, and Jhelum to Pakistan, you deprived Jammu and Kashmir of its single most important resource, hydro resource, which was water. With the result that they have huge power cuts even today. I mean, that's anecdotal. I live in Kashmir for several months in a year, and I experience it on a daily basis. The largest, the biggest resource that you have, and you still haven't enough power to be able to provide electricity to households.
So, Professor Mattu, writing in the Hindustan Times, you said, re-evaluate the Indus Water Treaty through the lens of Kashmiri interests. A withdrawal should not be ruled out. We also heard Prime Minister Modi in his first address to the nation after Operation Sindoor saying that water and blood cannot flow together. We also heard Chief Minister Omar Abdullah talk about the barrage, and whether it's time to look at how Kashmir can get more water, not stop water to Pakistan, but get more water out of this deal, which ties up with what you have just explained to us. Um, can India hold back the water physically? A, is it physically possible? Are we ready to do that? B, what is the impact on Pakistan if it does? And C, again, India has said that it needs irrevocable proof from Pakistan that it has, I'm quoting them, abjured support to terrorism in order for this treaty to be, operational again. How does Pakistan prove it to India? So
See,
three questions.
first of all, the whole question of abeyance, I don't understand what abeyance mean. I'm
Mm,
sure you can should get some lawyer or some diplomat to explain to
mm,
you. Means suspending, but
mm,
that's really a halfway house. As you said, it's how do you then revoke that suspension? What do you do while it's in abeyance?
mm,
That's not clear. I think it was done
mm,
without as much diligence that I would have required it from my bureaucrats before announcing it. The fact is that you cannot withdraw from the treaty unilaterally. You can bilaterally renegotiate the treaty, and India has asked for a review and renegotiation. And indeed, as I said, the
mm,
fact of the matter remains quite apart from the attacks, quite
mm,
apart from terrorism, quite apart from what happened in Pahalgam. This treaty has outlived its time
mm,
in terms of the following reasons: climate change, melting glaciers, the fragility of the ecology of the Himalayas more generally, the
mm,
new demographic pressures, and technology, which has now far superseded what you had in the 50s and in 1960 when it was signed, or before that when it was negotiated. For all these reasons, what you could, if say, imagine India and Pakistan were friendly neighbors, then you could have a treaty for the optimal utilization of these of the rivers of the Indus Basin rather than partition rivers. The model was the Tennessee Valley Authority, which managed all the rivers of the Tennessee River and its tributaries so to benefit all the states, including Alabama, Mississippi, Kentucky, and all the other states who were impacted. This didn't happen in India, Pakistan. Now, what would that mean? That would mean that you have all the rivers as a common resource, and the common resource would be used for the benefit of the people of the subcontinent, including and especially the people of Jammu and Kashmir, who have first right over at least the rivers of the Jhelum, Chenab, and Indus. Not the exclusive rights, but at least the first rights. Now, what what can you do
mm,
in a manner of withdrawal? Withdrawal under, as I said, the Vienna Law of Treaties, Vienna Law of Conventions, Article 62 explicitly states, and that is borrowed from the doctrine of rebus sic stantibus in international law, that suppose you and I decided to have this program on the Indus Water Treaty or on Operation Sindoor, but there's a nuclear war happening somewhere in between United States and China. So the circumstances under which we agreed to do this program have so dramatically altered. I'll say, Anuradha, I'm sorry, I can't keep up with my
mm,
good faith understanding with you right now because the circumstances have changed. Similarly, for a treaty, if the fundamental circumstances on the basis of which you negotiated the treaty have altered dramatically, you no longer need to abide by the commitment that
mm,
you have made when you signed the treaty. As I said, technology, environmental fragility, demographic pressures, and cross border terrorism have dramatically altered the circumstances. So, India should and can withdraw from the treaty. Now, what can it do, India, in the short and medium and long term? Short term, if it was bloody minded,
mm,
the during May and June, during the dry season leading up to the monsoons, it can desilt, flush out the reservoirs. I mean, there's silting happening. Remove all the sand and all the
mm.
garbage off the
That comes
reservoir
down.
and
Yeah.
fill up the reservoir in a manner that will impact on the river flow to the to Pakistan. So in the lean season, when one crop is being harvested and the other is being planted, because you in Punjab you have Rabi and Kharif, two crops, you can impact both crops from one from the harvest and the other from planting. Secondly, in the monsoon season, when you want to control the water flow in a manner that you won't flood the plains of the Punjab, you release the waters. Now, this is if you were going to be bloody minded, and
Bloody
neither of
mind.
which India has done while the treaty is
Yeah,
in
yeah,
abeyance.
yeah.
But for the long term, you build reservoirs, you build storage, and you build more run of the river projects or other projects. Because each time you have started doing that, even though it's within the law, Pakistan has delayed it by first going to the commission, then going for neutral export, then going for arbitration. Expensive, but it delays the project to a point where it has less value than it did when you started off on the project, whether it's Baghliar, Salal, uh, or indeed the Tulbul navigation project. On each project, they'll make a noise and delay it because there is a provision of conflict resolution, and they use every rule of the book to try and delay your projects, with the result that the impact is on the people of Jammu and Kashmir.
What's the next step here at this point? You
Next step is to, and Pakistan seems to have given positive signals, so they're ready to or review of the treaty. I think you should sit down. As I said, let's assume that Pakistan, you in measurable terms, you know that Pakistan is not going to use terrorism as an instrument of foreign policy. I say, even then, now go ahead and sit back on the table, get the best experts in the world.
and renegotiate. So, irrespective of what happens, this Indus Water Treaty needs to be renegotiated.
It's garbage today. I mean, I'm saying it strongly.
Fair
Frankly
enough.
speaking,
Yeah.
just because it happened at a time and because it's lived through all these vicissitudes of India Pakistan conflict. Now, it happened because of Indian generosity. Now, people often say, oh, if as an upper riparian state, you do this here, the Chinese will do it to you because they're the upper rivers, upper riparian state as far as the Brahmaputra goes, which they call the Sangpo. In China, the China is not following the model set by India on the Indus Water Treaty. They have not made a deal on water sharing with any country in the world. They may have solved the border disputes, but they have not done any bilateral deals. If you think that you're going to be able to use the fact of your generosity in the Indus Water Treaty as an example for China to use and follow, you're living in some other land. China is going to do what is in China's interest. You have to bilaterally deal with it. Similarly, even with the Mahakali in Nepal or the Tista and the Ganga Basin in with Bangladesh, bilaterally. This every treaty should be bespoke, sui generis, with certain principles, which is that it has to be used optimally for the common destiny, if you would like to call it, of the people of the region, for the common prosperity of uh, of the people of the region, and for building real peace, to getting real stakeholders invested in peace. Because initially, just to conclude on that note, that you had this belief that you could, if you got knowledge communities together, uh, doctors together or engineers together, and kept the politicians away or the academics away, they would resolve the problems of the world. The whole politics about how COVID originated and the COVID vaccine was created demonstrates how that's not possible. Politics is going to intervene. Similarly, just because you have fantastic civil engineers like Narendra Das Gulati, for instance, who helped negotiate this treaty from the Indian point of view, doesn't mean that this treaty can be divorced or insulated or siloed from the politics of water. So you have to get political actors, you have to understand the stakeholders, you have to get academics, intellectuals, and experts involved, but keeping in view the larger framework of what is happening in South Asia.
Those were strong and very impassioned words, Professor Mattu. But this gives me the cue to now shift to the last area that I want to pick up today, and that is Kashmir. The impact on Kashmir of this latest conflict. I'm not an expert, but people are not saying war, they're saying hostilities and war-like. But the impact on Kashmir, we saw, you were talking about the Tulbul navigation barrage, you're talking about the Indus Water Treaty. We saw a war of words between Chief Minister Omar Abdullah and former Chief Minister Mehbooba Mufti, who you were an advisor to, and even to her father before that. So you know Kashmir closely, you live in Kashmir, you're a Kashmiri Pandit, there's an emotional, intellectual, and your life experience wrapped up with the fate of Kashmir. How do you see this current conflict impact Kashmir? We saw Kashmiris speak unequivocally condemning the violence, coming out in protest across the political spectrum. Is this an opportunity that India can use to just to enhance the ties of the heart, or is this a point again where Indian defense forces, in their search for the terrorists and the perpetrators, you know just hurt everybody, make everybody vulnerable, and alienate people further, what is referred to as collective punishment?
Yeah. No, I think you've said it absolutely brilliantly. And let me just even reiterate what you said and perhaps flesh it out a bit more. I think the biggest gainer, if there is a blessing in disguise from these horrible, traumatic terrorist attacks, is the overwhelming sentiment on the ground. This wasn't a forced sentiment. This was a spontaneous outburst against violence. No violence, no terrorism in our name. The Mirwais from the pulpit of the Jama Masjid had a 1 minute silence during Friday namaz. Across the political divide of whether it was Omar Abdullah or Mehbooba Mufti or Sajjad Lone or the BJP, every man, woman, and child condemned the violence. There were candlelight vigils, marches across the valley and in the state against this. This, how do you actually translate this into a sustainable peace or yearning for peace and build on this sentiment? Because this message had been unequivocal, unambiguous, unlike in the past where someone might say, oh, you need to go into the root cause. No question. This was Kashmiris speaking in one voice. So you build on that. How do you build on that? I believe you build on that by, of course, ensuring that security is not compromised. But what you lost in Pahalgam was the fact of that you didn't have a civilian security grid. You
Mm,
you invested far too much in electronic interception and surveillance.
mm.
If you have to create a civilian security grid, you'll have to rely on human intelligence, and that can be only built through an investment in people.
Just want to talk about this idea of Naya Kashmir 2019, the abrogation, the statehood, being replaced by, union territory status, 6 months of no internet. And today you're talking about a civilian, security information grid. These two don't add up, isn't it? You can't have the alienation, the hurt, the kind of crackdown we saw in 2019, and 5 years later, say that we don't have a civilian security grid that is needed in order to be able to prevent such attacks like the Pahalgam one.
I don't want to. In Kashmir's long and troubled history, one good thing is public memory is often short. So I think people have moved beyond 2019. And
You're pretty clear about that.
I think a large section of them have moved beyond 2009. As I said, there are people who are alienated and disaffected, but they're not the critical mass that you will want for a project of building in Naya Kashmir. I think the overwhelming sentiment against violence is a measure, is a signal, is a pointer that we can do things even without reversing the clock, which is I believe genuinely go back statehood, even though you might have all the contrarians say and all the arguments being built how this is the worst time. Oh, you see how fragile peace is, how terrorists can come and disrupt peace. Precisely why you need more local political actors invested in governance. And surely, if a union territory controlled by a lieutenant governor or answerable to a home ministry cannot prevent Pahalgam, that is more the reason why you should need to invest in governance, which has stakeholders amongst the people and the political actors in the state to restore statehood.
mm,
Then, as I said, the civilian security grid is essential. No matter if it what you did in 2019 after relied on uh, other measures, but you need to reinvest in that. And you have to recapture the sentiment, the composite culture, which has resisted the forces of radicalism. And I genuinely believe that you have one of the failures of the project on Kashmir is that you have not been able to convince enough Kashmiri Pandits to go back.
mm,
There
mm,
aren't enough incentives. If you believe that return of Kashmiri Pandits is not just the interest of that community, their dignified return, but in the interest of the wider project of nationhood, of nation building, then you have to provide the incentives which would make people like me, I mean, we are there already, but people like me to go back. When you have jobs here, when your families have moved out, but still wanting to go back to your roots, then you have to do something. Similarly, to reinvest in that composite, not in a kind of manufactured state patronage sense, but invest in people and invest in the young people who are
mm.
yearning for opportunities, who are
You
yearning
talked
to
about a
become part
youth
of.
fund, creating a youth fund. I think you've said
Yes, I
this.
did that. I said that because if they want to connect, they want to build, not destroy, then invest in that.
Mm,
After all, the as I said, that a democratic, dignified, and deeply India is something that you should work towards from what happened in after what happened in Pahalgam. And it is possible because I don't think it is lack of imagination. If you have the right imagination and the political will, and fortunately you have still some of the strongest political leaders in power today, if they
mm.
wanted to, and they showed imagination by sending this all-party delegation across the world.
In this article, you said we must act with the imagination of the Sufi, the clarity of the strategist, and the resolve of the constitutionalist. It's a lovely sentence. I
Thank
just
you.
want you to elaborate a little bit more in the context of, do you think that this is that you will see positive outcomes going forward for Kashmir at from this point in time at this juncture, or do you see that very sort of hopeless spiral of violence and disaffection, and then a little peace and then something else? Sitting in Mumbai, thanks to conversations, thanks to books, thanks to movies, you feel very much for the Kashmiri situation. um, do you feel that this is do you feel positive at this juncture, or do you feel uh, that the government needs to really work harder to build bridges, to make connections of the heart?
In a strange sense, counterintuitively, I feel positive. I think there is a silver lining. I think that the government is perhaps willing to now act with imagination, which is rekindled by this sentiment on the ground and catalyzed by the horrible terrorist incidents in Pakistan. And you need that sense of compassion that a Sufi can bring with the clarity of what a strategist can bring, while recognizing that the only morality you should recognize is the morality of the Constitution. If you were able to act on these three pillars, I think to believe that Jammu and Kashmir will never see sustained peace may be a false idea, maybe part of the false consciousness or the narrative history that we become used to. Perhaps we can invite you then to set up your studio not in Mumbai, but in Srinagar, in Kashmir, because that's where you will be able to experience pure air, pure hearts, and without any threats to disruption.
India has made it very clear that any act of terrorism will be seen as an act of war, and it will be dealt with in the way we dealt with the Pahalgam attack. Um, do you think going forward this will be enough deterrence to prevent Pakistan sponsored terror attacks, or is this now going to be the new normal where there will be terror attacks, India will retaliate in this manner, there will be counter retaliation? And we saw how the states on the western front had to deal with it. We have a civilian toll, especially in Jammu and Kashmir. Do you see this as an effective counter to terrorism? Because there are many who believe that Operation Sindoor is not going to ensure peace on that count.
I'm less optimistic about Pakistan, but what you have to do unilaterally is, for the sake of deterrence, is to make it credible,
Mm,
which means what you promise to do, you should do,
mm,
and don't promise to do things that you can't do because of either lacking the capacity or the political will. So now that the Prime Minister has said that we shall treat every terrorist incident as an act of war, you must act, because that erodes the credibility of your deterrence.
mm,
The second part, which the larger international community is going to be worried about, is that it doesn't escalate or spiral beyond subconventional, asymmetric warfare,
mm,
at least not beyond the conventional level. So you have to communicate directly to Pakistan, and that's why talking is still important, that this is what we are going to do, and this is how we ensure
mm,
that we do not let this spiral out of control. So, credibility of your deterrent posture and stability so that it doesn't escalate out of control is what you have to ensure. Whether Pakistan will recognize that this is at least, the very least, in its interests of its own people, we have to wait and see. I am disillusioned and disappointed because you have in Pakistan's most important actor today, Asim Munir, someone who seems reckless and dangerous. I hope I am wrong, but perhaps we can also hope that sooner rather than later he will move on, and there will be a situation where the next person will be like his predecessor, General Bajwa, who will recognize the reality that in Pakistan cannot continue with, with this deep hostility towards India without destroying itself. So unless it wants to commit suicide, the
mm,
path
mm.
is to, or his path is towards compromise, to finding peace with India and its people.
Professor Mattu, as always, this is a learning experience. Thank you for all the deep thought, the understanding that you have helped us gain in this conversation. We'll keep talking. Thank you.
Thank you, Anuradha. It was always a pleasure and privilege to be on your program. And best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll keep talking.